To the standing orders. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For members in the Zoom, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best we can, and we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. To prevent disruptive audio feedback incidents during our meeting, we kindly ask that all participants keep their earpieces away from the microphone. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Pursuant to Standing Order 106-4, the committee recommends consideration of the request by 5 members of the committee to undertake a study of the reclassification and transfer of Luka, Magnotta, and other federal offenders. I will now open the floor to debate. Mr. Caputo, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's an honor to be here on behalf of all Canadians and the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Caribou. Mr. Chair, this is what I can say in the circumstances. I think most Canadians were shocked at the transfer of Paul Bernardo, and I feel similarly Canadians are also shocked to find out that Luka Magnotta and others are not only in medium security but also in the same penitentiary. It's as conservatives, we will always stand with victims, stand with those seeking transparency, and those seeking the truth. And it's for that reason that today we bring forward this motion in light of the significant offenses that have been committed by not only these 2 people, but others who are in medium security to further study this. It's important that we get to the bottom of the impact of bills like Bill C-83 and other policies in place with this Liberal government. And with that, I will move my motion and read it into the record, Mr. Chair. The motion reads as follows: that, in light of the transfer of sadistic killer Luka Magnotta out of a maximum security prison to a medium security prison, the same facility that serial killer and rapist Paul Bernardo was transferred to last year, and given that the Minister's office was made aware of these transfers in advance, the committee immediately undertake a study in priority order of no less than 6 meetings, and that these meetings begin this week on how the decision to make this transfer was made, the prisoner transfer process for prisoners in maximum security facilities, and the committee report its findings to the House of Commons, and the committee shall call the following witnesses to appear: A, the Commissioner of the Correctional Service of Canada, Anne Kelly; B, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, Sean Tupper; C, the Minister of Public Safety and Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, the Honourable Dominic LeBlanc; D, the former Minister of Public Safety, the Honourable Marco Mendicino; E, the Chief of Staff to the Minister of Public Safety at the time; F, Janice Charette, former Clerk of the Privy Council; G, the Warden at La Macasa Institution; H, representatives from the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers; I, Marcia Penner, Tennille Chwalziak, and Laura Murray as individuals. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Caputo. And now we have Mr. Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know we've had a number of meetings on the issue of the Bernardo transfer already, but certainly new information has come to light that I think is shocking to Canadians. It's shocking because some people might have dismissed the transfer of Paul Bernardo as an isolated incident. I know that the Minister of Public Safety at the time said it was shocking and incomprehensible. But now we've learned that it's not just an isolated incident, that this is a pattern, a repeated pattern under this government, that several high-profile serial killers and killers have been moved out of maximum and into medium. Furthermore, there's been recent ATIPs that have revealed that the Chief of Staff of the Public Safety Minister at the time was aware that these transfers were taking place. And it's interesting because in all of our study about Paul Bernardo's transfer, the minister's office knew all along that Luka Magnotta was being transferred in 2022 as well, and yet that information was never brought to light. It was never revealed to this committee under our previous study, and that's not the only high-profile case that we've seen. And so I think
Point of order.
Point of order, Ms. O'Connell, go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. Sorry, can we get this motion distributed?
It is. I'm told it just has been, Ms. O'Connell. Can you confirm if you received it?
I'm just checking, sorry. Clerk, it's in the committee binder. Can we get it distributed in both official languages and the text? We all have to log into our binders now?
Just check your email. The clerk is telling me it's attached to the email.
Okay. Okay, I have it.
Thank you. Continue, Mr. Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm certainly glad that all members are getting a copy of this motion. I think it's a very good motion. I think it hits at the heart of the matter. And it raises, this new information that we've received, that the Chief of Staff of the Public Safety Minister knew, that staff in the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office knew. I think this raises very important questions that need to be furthermore looked into, and this is a question about the principle of ministerial accountability. If there is a policy, unofficial or official, in ministers' offices or in the Prime Minister's office that staff are not to inform ministers of hot-button controversial issues, I think this undermines a key tenet of ministerial responsibility and ministerial accountability. And if that is indeed a policy, I think that needs to be looked into, because ministerial accountability is one of the bedrock principles of our parliamentary system of government, and we cannot allow mistakes like this, whether deliberate or from incompetence, to continue. And so it is a very worthwhile study for us to continue at this committee. And I think also we need to look further into Bill C-83 and other legislation that I think has been contributing to this rise in the amount of transfers out of maximum and into medium security prison. And so with that, I'll just be saying I support this motion, and I'll pass on to the next speaker. Thank you.
Mr. Polhus, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Right now, public trust has been unbelievably compromised. I was here in 2019 when I was Vice Chair of Public Safety Committee, and when we worked on Bill C-83, the legislation that entered into force in 2019, and that changed detention conditions. And Mr. Chair, at the time when we debated such things and we worked on bills and adopted them, the public is not always aware of what is happening. But now we see the outcome. We see situations where Paul Bernardo is transferred to a medium security prison, and now Luka Magnotta, who has been in prison only for 10 years, has now been transferred to a medium security prison. People do not understand this, and it's only normal for them not to understand. Here we have a very important motion because we want to understand why the Liberal government has implemented such a bill in 2019 and how the process worked. And we're talking about victims most of all. And when we talk about victims, these are the people who are primarily concerned. The law is clear. Victims should be informed. Mr. Chair, let me show you something. This is the Charter of Victims' Rights. This charter has been in force since 2014, never respected by this government. The victims are entitled to information, right to protection, participation, and a right to move. Right to information and the participation was not respected. These are rights that have been violated in the case of Mr. Bernardo, Paul Bernardo's case. Why, Mr. Chair, should we always fight for victims? We always have to fight for the right of victims to be heard. Why do we have criminals like Paul Bernardo and Magnotta, just to name these ones, because I'm sure there are others who have been transferred in such conditions? Why do these people enjoy such improved conditions, whereas they're the worst criminals we have in Canada? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, did you call my name, Mr. Chair?
Did, yes.
Sorry, there's a little bit of a delay. Thanks, Chair. And I'm glad we have this motion. I think from our perspective, we have no issue with looking further into transfers of prisoners, classifications, and working with this committee to put forward reasonable, worthwhile recommendations on how we can advance victims' rights in this country, how we can improve the system. But I think what we learned from the last few days of study that we did on this, because, Mr. Chair, it's important to note that this isn't actually new. This isn't something that the Conservatives are just bringing forward today. We actually, as a committee, have already held several meetings on this and heard testimony. And so this would be a continuation of that. So, you know, I think today, and I hope that today is not just Conservatives performing for clips, and that this committee is actually serious about working together to put forward serious, legitimate policy recommendations, how we can move things forward. And because that's exactly what we want to do and what we did as a committee when we all came prepared to ask questions of CSC and the witnesses that we had before on this very issue. So again, no issue as we've participated and asked these tough questions, as I think all Canadians want to. I will point out, however, I think it's important that we do look into this. It was stated just in the earlier speaker, Chair, that this was somehow related to a liberal legislation or change, and that's simply not true. In fact, some of the highest years of prisoner classification changes from maximum to medium were under Harper Conservative governments. In 2012 and 2013, there were 291 reclassification from maximum to medium. In 2013 to 14, 319 from maximum to medium. So if there's a question of how this is happening, what the policies are in place for the Correctional Services Canada, then I think that's a wholesome conversation we need to have. But I think putting it out there that this was somehow a change in legislation or policy is, frankly, Mr. Chair, just not accurate, because I think it's important that Canadians understand if there are certain politicians trying to use the most heinous and horrendous crimes in this country as a fear-mongering tactic, to suggest that current policies are somehow different from when Conservatives have held office, because I think it's important we actually get this data on the table so Canadians see exactly how decisions are made. If this committee wants to make recommendations to the government to make changes or review policy, I think that's absolutely appropriate. But if there's this suggestion, if we're starting off at this base of misinformation, that there was a policy change when, Mr. Chair, I just outlined the highest number of maximum to medium reclassification in our justice system happened in the year of 2013, 2014. Under the Conservative so-called tough on crime language. So I think it's important we get the facts, and that's why we're very happy to continue to hold meetings on this and make legitimate, fulsome policy recommendations based on what we hear, and ensuring that Canadians' voices are at the table. But like I said, Mr. Chair, I think it's incredibly important that we start from a place of truth and honesty. And so I hope that the continuation of this meeting does do that, because I do think we have a number of policy insights and things that I think every member of this committee would want to share. Mr. Chair, I'll just raise a couple of points with the motion as drafted, and I want to hear from colleagues. So please add me to the list again, because I'd like to hear the other opinions first. But in terms of immediately in 6 meetings, again, no issue studying this. Whether or not we need 6 meetings, I mean, we're open to the idea, but based on the witnesses listed in this motion, that wouldn't equate to 6 meetings. So I think the Conservatives are perhaps maybe being a little disingenuous in terms of what this motion says and what they hope to accomplish. But we can debate those numbers in terms of what's needed, in terms of immediately. So I guess based on this, the Conservatives are abandoning the auto theft study. They don't want to complete C26, which, as we heard from witnesses, would actually have direct impacts on Canadians' safety, for example, during a weather event where phone lines could go down and there wouldn't be protections in place to ensure that telecommunication companies or banking have robust procedures in place to avoid cyber attacks, or even, like I said, in the example of a weather event, to ensure that there's a robust system in place. I guess Conservatives don't care about those impacts. And again, this committee can determine timing, but this was something that committee had determined in terms of the sequencing of meetings. So if auto theft is being abandoned, cybersecurity is being abandoned, and then the other studies that we were looking at as well, in terms of just timing. And then I would assume that the minister's visit on mandate is also being abandoned, which it was scheduled for next week, given if this motion passes as is. So I have concerns with some of that, just given the other committee priorities that we've talked about. But like I said, I'm prepared to listen to what other opinions in terms of priority and sequencing, but we're not opposed to this study. I would also suggest, Mr. Chair, I'm going to move just one amendment for now, and that is to add the following witnesses: Howard Sapers, the former correctional investigator for Canada, the John Howard Society of Canada, the Canadian Association of Elizabeth Fry Societies, Aboriginal Legal Services, Black Legal Action Center, and Canadian Civil Liberties Association. And I'll distribute those names to the clerk. I may have other amendments later, Mr. Chair, in terms of, as I said, my raised concerns about, just in terms of sequencing and the amount of meetings. But we're more than happy to move forward to continue the continuation of this study. But I do want to take into account other people's comments before making any additional amendments. But I think it's important we add some additional witnesses there.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Do we have any comments on those amendments, on this amendment? Mr. Lloyd, please.
Yes, I don't have any issue with any of those witnesses, but I just would note that at the beginning of Ms. O'Connell's statement that she was talking about how Conservatives were being disingenuous because this wouldn't take 6 meetings, but I think certainly with those additional witnesses, I think it would take us to 6 meetings. And so I think that just, it shows that, we have no problem with adding those witnesses. And we look forward to having 6 meetings on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Biddle, you're up, please.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I appreciate being here today and the questions that need to be asked. I agree with Ms. O'Connell that it's important that we continue our study. Even though this is a meeting not normally scheduled, this is, I think, a continuation of what this committee has been studying. And we've heard some, in my mind anyways, excellent recommendations. I know from Mr. Danson, who's the lawyer for the French and Mahaffey families. I guess I'm a bit disappointed that we haven't had the time to sit down and make those recommendations and provide a report. And perhaps this is a good opportunity to continue those discussions. But my worry is, and I agree with Monsieur Paul Hus that people don't understand the system. He's right. My worry is that certain politicians attempt to use situations like this to cloud how the system operates. On this committee right now, there's a former police officer who has a distinguished career of service, a former prosecutor who I also believe had a distinguished career of service to his community. But they know, and kind of not acknowledging the fact that our legal system operates independent of elected officials, that these decisions are made in terms of reclassification of inmates, made independently of elected officials. And as elected officials, we can be angry. I was very public in terms of my extreme disappointment and shock in terms of Mr. Bernardo's transfer. And it's something that we expressed as a committee, but these are decisions outside our control. I know Mr. Mott's probably didn't arrest certain people that other individuals in his community would want arrested. Mr. Caputo may have asked for a sentence that was lower than victims may have wanted, but he was making those decisions, and Mr. Mott's were making those decisions independently. And they were not popular, but they were not subject to, in Mr. Mott's case, the mayor coming in and saying this is wrong, or in Mr. Caputo's case, the premier coming in and saying this is inappropriate. Back when we had Ann Kelly, who's the commissioner in, I asked her, can the minister get involved in this? Can the minister direct the correctional services in the transfer of an inmate? Is it in a legal order? And her quote was, or her response to my question was, my understanding is that the minister does
Mr.
not
Biddle, please, we have a point of
role.
order.
Sorry.
And my apologies, Mr. Chair. My apologies for interrupting Mr. Biddle, but I just wanted to clarify, we are speaking on the amendments as proposed by Ms. O'Connell right now. Is that correct?
No, we're speaking just in the speaking order.
Okay, but don't we have to deal with?
Yes, in the amendment.
Sorry to clarify, we are speaking on the amendments right now. Okay, so I just would just say maybe it is relevant to the greater study, but maybe if we could be talking about these amendments put forward by Ms. O'Connell.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll finish my point and then I'll give up the floor. That is appropriate. I thought we were back on the general list. I will just add Ms. Kelly's comments and then give up the floor and go back on the speaking list if that's all right. Her response was that the minister does not have a role. It's very much an operational decision. So, Mr. Chair, if I can go back on the list on the main motion, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle. Ms. Ferrari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone for being here. And I know the victims' families are watching at home. Marcia, Laura, and Tennille, and you know, I hope we get some resolve today for you, as I know how re-traumatized you've been. I want to read this into the record because I think it's really important. Everyone here, everyone in this courthouse, everyone in this city, everyone in this province, everyone in this country knows that you are a dangerous offender. The behavioral restraints that you require is jail. You require it, in my view, for the rest of your natural life. You are a sexually sadistic psychopath. The likelihood of you being treated is remote in the extreme. That is Justice Lesage, who sentenced Paul Bernardo. Those are his words. And when I came into this committee today, a reporter stopped me and asked me if we believe that criminals should be focusing on, if we should be in our justice system focusing on rehabilitation rather than punishment. And I asked that reporter to repeat back to me what the sentencing judge said about Bernardo. Can he ever be rehabilitated? And the answer is no. And so what we're here today to do is to discuss what this is, and I want to talk about the amendments that Ms. O'Connell has put forward, and I think adding more witnesses to the list is a great idea, because the point of this motion that was put forward by my colleague, Mr. Caputo, is to figure out how and why this secret transfer happened of Canada's most sadistic and notorious rapists and killers. Because if we don't understand how and why, then we can't fix it. And so I want to read to you, there was an article that came out March 9th by the CBC. Corrections chief briefed Mendocino's chief of staff weeks before Bernardo's prison transfer. In fact, the office was notified 7 times. So to Ms. O'Connell's point about, in years gone by, never have we seen such gross incompetence. This isn't necessarily always about policy and legislation. This is about an incompetent people who didn't do their job. That's what we have to delve into here to make sure that this never happens again.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead, Ms. Michaud.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair. Could we refocus the debate, because we have a motion before us that is dealing with Luka Magnotta, and it's not one about Paul Bernardo, and the MP seems to be digressing. So could we please come back to discussing what Ms. McConnell talked about, and then we can go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Michaud. Ms. Farrell, please, could you?
Thank you, Chair. Actually, the motion put forward does say, in light of the transfer of sadistic killer Luka Magnotta out of maximum security prison to a medium security prison, the same facility that serial killer and rapist Paul Bernardo was transferred to last year. So absolutely, this includes Bernardo, and it's important that we talk about that. So back to my point, I am here, and in regard to the amendments, which I think is critical, and it is great to hear that Mr. Biddle is going to be supportive of this, as this directly impacts the people of his riding who have written directly to him. And I'm going to read into the record some of the comments that have been stated. So this comes from Laura, Marcia, and Tennille, who were the best friends of Kristen French, whose life was taken. And when I asked of their response to the CBC article that the Minister of Public Safety's office was notified 7 times, and their response, and she gave me permission to read this to the committee. Hi, Michelle. Once again, we are saddened and disappointed that the Government of Canada has added to the continued emotional trauma and victimization of the many people who have been affected by this man and his brutal crimes. To know that so much communication took place about the transfer, and yet no one deemed it important enough to ensure that the minister was addressed personally, speaks yet again to the disregard of victims in our criminal justice system. This has to change. Victims should and must come first. Thank you for your continued effort on this. Signed, Laura, Marcia, and Tennille. Now, the bigger question has come up here today of where this all sits in terms of operations. And who does the Commissioner of Corrections Canada report to?
Point of order, please. Go ahead.
I guess what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think my comments were called on in terms of it being specific to Ms. O'Connell's amendment, and I think Ms. Ferrari, though her points are relevant to the motion at large, if we can focus on Ms. O'Connell's amendment, and then we can get back to the main motion and discuss those points that are relevant.
Thank you, Mr. Biddle.
Thank you. So I guess to come back to the amendment, which is where I am speaking on, is that number 6, and the meetings that Ms. O'Connell has suggested we do less than, and in terms of moving things around, and I think this with adding those.
Point of order.
Mr. McKinnon, go ahead.
The amendment has got nothing to do with number of meetings. It's just the number of witnesses. So I'm wondering if we could perhaps proceed to a vote on that amendment, and then we could go back to the main motion.
You want to vote? So, you want to go ahead? We'll call vote on the amendments. Okay.
I think it's probably unanimous here.
Okay. Is it unanimous?
Chair, a recorded vote?
Ms. O'Connell,
Yes.
Mr. Shifke,
Oui.
Mr. Biddle,
In favor.
Mr. Gaillard,
In favor?
Mr. McKinnon,
In favor?
Mr. Lloyd,
In favor?
Mr. Carrick,
In favor.
Mr. Matz,
In favor?
Mr. Caputo,
Yes.
Madame Michaud,
Contre.
Mr. Julian,
En faveur.
One nays.
1 nay. 10 yeas. Motion is passed, or the amendment is passed. Before we go for any further, Ms. Michaud, you had your hand up. Was that just up previous, or I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything on the screen? You're good? Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. O'Connell.
on that same point, can you please update us the speaking order on the main motion?
Yes, it's Mr. Julian, Ms. Michaud, Mr. Motz, Ms. O'Connell, Mr. Biddle.
Thank you.
Good. Back to Ms. Ferrari, please.
Thank you, Chair. And
Monsieur le
Sorry,
Président, je
Chair.
peux toujours parler, mais je parlerai quand ça se sent. Il semble avoir un petit délai pour nous.
There seems to be a delay for those of us in video conference, so I wanted to be sure that I'd kept my speaking time because I would still like to speak.
She's on the speaking list.
Yes, you're on the speaking list after Mr. Julian, who is after Ms. Ferrari.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. O'Connell, please.
sorry, if we're going to be a stickler for speaking order, I believe Mr. Biddle was on the list. If Ms. Ferrari was on the list for the amendment, which is now carried, now we go back to the general speaking list, which I believe was Mr. Biddle.
Why don't we just have the one speaking list on this?
Right.
So I'm just
But I
going
think
to,
there was confusion in terms of the amendment. So if Ms. Ferrari was speaking on the amendment, then you would move to the first speaker of the main motion because we just dealt with the amendment.
okay, maybe that was my fault, Ms. O'Connell, but we're going to just finish with Ms. Ferrari, and then we're going to go move to Mr. Julian, please.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted
Ferrari,
clarification.
sorry.
thanks. I've been called much worse in my life, Chair. It's okay. Thank you to this, and hopefully we can get through to the meat and potatoes here of this, because I think what we're really here and elected to do here is be the voice of the people that don't have one, and in particular in this case the victims. So to the point it came earlier, it's an operational decision. Well, who does the Commissioner of Corrections Canada report to? The Minister of Public Safety. The Commissioner of CSC is recommended for appointment by the Prime Minister and approved by an order in Council. This appointed position reports directly to the Minister of Public Safety, Democratic Institutions and Intergovernmental Affairs, and is accountable to the public via the Parliament. So that's important to have on the record of what that is. So I just want to read into the record that this letter that has garnered a lot of attention, and so it should. This is dated March 4th, 2024, and it is directed to Ms. Kelly, who is the Commissioner that reports to Corrections Canada and reports to the Minister of Public Safety. Ms. Kelly, I am sure by now you are aware that the living conditions of serial rapist, psychopath, murderer, and dangerous offender Paul Bernardo have been revealed. Contrary to your address, these conditions are quite the opposite to what you led us all to believe. You claimed there was a lateral move. Other than the fact that there are cells and prison guards, the difference between a maximum security penitentiary and a medium security facility such as La Macasa couldn't be more different. Please help me understand how someone such as Paul Bernardo can be housed in a facility such as this. One of Canada's most notorious killers, a psychopathic serial rapist, a designated dangerous offender. Does any of this mean anything? I can only imagine the prisoners remaining in maximum security penitentiaries must be asking the same question. If someone who commits the worst of the worst crimes doesn't qualify for the harshest conditions, then who does? This monster is allowed to play pickup hockey, tennis, billiards, work out in a 5-star gym facility, and partake in a workshop with tools, signing out tools like the ones he used to torture, sodomize, and ultimately kill his victims. Does this seem fair, logical, ethical, right? And your prison staff feel safe? They certainly shouldn't. My best friend, Kristen French, doesn't get to skate anymore. She was a very skilled and talented figure skater. She could have taken her love and passion for the sport to the top, but that dream was stolen from her, as was her life. A beautiful life that was filled with so much promise, all taken away by that psychopath monster who is now living the good life. I understand that Paul Bernardo has rights. I'm not disputing that. But these should be basic rights. He took away lives in the worst way possible. There has to be lifelong consequences for this, not rewards. Ms. Kelly, I have to assume that any human being with common sense can see that this move is nothing short of insanity. It's okay to make mistakes or revoke bad decisions. This was a very bad decision. I know you and your team claim all the criteria was met and that policies and procedures were followed. You can now see that by moving Bernardo was a major mistake, and a major mistake was made. You can right this wrong. By leaving Bernardo in medium security, you are telling everyone that what this monster did wasn't that bad. You are telling other criminals to just do their time quietly, and you will be rewarded despite the severity of the crime you commit. Is this the message you are wanting to give? I certainly hope not. There are more details coming out soon with regards to living conditions at La Macasa. It's time to do the right thing for the victims, their families, and all Canadian alike. Do the right thing, Ms. Kelly. Move Paul Bernardo back to maximum security where he belongs. And so I would encourage this committee, and in particular somebody who sits on this committee who is from the region in which these women were raped and murdered, to further study this so that we can, and with 6 meetings, I might add, with all of these witnesses, make sure that this never happens again. And to my point, to my colleague to my left, Mr. Paul Hoos, the Victim Bill of Rights be upheld, because we haven't seen that under this Liberal government. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Julian, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. My thoughts are, of course, with the victims today as well.
Support the discussion that we're having. I appreciated that we've added additional witnesses. I think that is very important. Certainly thinking of with victims today and the fact that we started this study last fall. And my concern is that we have yet to report if the objective of our committee is to put in place recommendations that we oblige the government to follow to ensure that the concerns that have been raised about victims and victims' families and the notification process around transfer, how transfers are effectuated, and also broad concerns that have been raised in the testimony that we've heard so far in this study about correctional officers being consulted, the ones who know best the offenders that are in the institutions. And we've heard from correctional officers that they haven't been consulted. And so I think for all those reasons, it is important to continue this study. I would like the motion to reflect that we are continuing a study that we began actually last November, and that what we're really doing is adding an additional 6 meetings for a total of no less than 11 meetings on this issue. And the fact is, as my Conservative colleagues have indicated, they see no distinction between the study that we started last fall and the proposal to extend that study or continue that study that we're hearing today. Now, I do believe that we have, as a committee, made the decision to move ahead on clause by clause on C26. Cybersecurity is an issue that we have seen is of fundamental importance. I believe that we can potentially wrap up the clause by clause study of this bill, which has been stuck out in no man's land now for 2 years. The reality is we need to complete our work on that. And I'm assuming that that's the intent as well, that we could potentially start the study this week. We would sit on clause by clause for cybersecurity, complete our work on that bill that has been delayed for far too long and is far too critical for Canada's infrastructure, and then come back to this study. I have no objections to that. Believe that the additional names that Ms. O'Connell offered have been valuable. I have a further concern that's not reflected in the motion, and I believe we need to clarify the motion around the fact that we're continuing the study. But my further concerns are the number of escapes that we saw in previous years, and I'm talking about the previous government, the Harper government. The number of escapes from federal institutions was at its highest level. In fact, the 3 worst years for prison escapes in recent memory have been under the Harper government. And at the same time, we saw proposals to slash funding for correctional services by $290 million. That was proposed by the Conservatives in December. That's total of $290 million out of the overall correctional services budget. I think that is a matter of some concern too. If we see a higher level of escapes, if we're talking about public safety, it's important to keep in context that slashing the budget, as was proposed and voted on in December, is not something that helps to reassure Canadians or to ensure public safety. So that's an element as well that I think needs to be considered as part of continuing our study. But overall, Mr. Chair, with those adjustment changes, I think the most important element is that we proceed to hear from witnesses, take the break around cybersecurity so that we can complete that work that has been delayed for far too long. Come back and complete the study. And most importantly, Mr. Chair, I would hope that we would actually issue the report in the House of Commons that ensures that victims are taken into consideration before transfers are put into place, that ensures that correctional officers are consulted in a meaningful way before these transfers take place. Can't defend at all the horrible, horrific, sadistic acts of Paul Bernardo and Luka Magnotta. The important thing is that public confidence see the correctional services and our prison system as working on their behalf. And I think it is crucial that we actually get to a report and get to those recommendations and table them in the House and have the debate in the House of Commons and ensure that government then the government is being pressured to put into place the recommendations that we are making. So in general, I support the motion. I think there's some tweaking required to ensure that people are aware that this is a continuation of a study that we started last November. But above all, I believe we need to complete this study, make the recommendations, and ensure that they are respected and put into place so that the concerns that have been raised over the last few months are finally met with the response of the Public Safety Committee. Merci, thank you.
Point of order.
Yes, just one moment, Mr. Carrick, please. Mr. Julian, are you making an amendment, or we received something here via email? I just want to clarify, because you did talk about making to the continuing study that we're presently doing. I just want to follow up and make sure we're not missing something before we move on.
No, what you received you can put aside, because we've had some adjustments, I think, when I wrote that up in response to the first, as the motion was tabled. But this is an evolving discussion. We have another hour or so to go, and I am carefully listening to all my colleagues from all parties to see the best way to come to a consensus on this. I would prefer that we clarify that we're continuing its study and adding an additional 6 meetings for a total of 11. I think that is something that would help for clarity. Hopefully that's something that the Conservatives would accept as a friendly amendment. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm concerned about the issue of the cuts that were proposed in December and what impact that may have on correctional facilities.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Point of order, Mr. Carrick, please.
Actually, that was me, I believe. And actually, I was going to make the same point that you just made, so we'll let it go.
Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. Mr. Carrick, you have your hand up. I want to go to you because I'm not sure if you were disrupted or not there.
Thanks, Chair. And I do have some things to say, but I believe Mr. Mott's was up before me, or at least I had seen his hand before mine had got up. So I can reserve my comments until I hear from my,
yes,
my colleague.
It's Miss Michaud, please. You're up.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think I had raised my hand before Mr. Julian, but that's okay. I let him speak. Mr. Chair, the interpreter would like to say that the sound is very poor.
Plus tôt l'année dernière. C'est complètement différent. Et j'ai signé ce censé-là, la raison pour laquelle on a une rencontre aujourd'hui, parce qu'il y aurait peut-être eu des manquements.
Ms. Michaud, I know there's a delay for you. Just one moment. We have a point of order. Mr. Biddle?
We're not receiving translation because of the poor sound quality. My apologies to Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, we're going to let you try again. Please. You can start over if you wish.
Samedi, unstable network connection. Je ne sais pas si vous préférez que je me reconnecte pour essayer de voir si.
Do you prefer I reconnect to see if it's working?
You're crackling. I was wondering if you maybe possibly close your video and try that.
Est-ce que c'est mieux? Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien?
Is it better? I shall continue. I was being told that I was connected to the internet and not via the Zoom application. So maybe I should use the Zoom application to see if it's better.
You were coming through there at the very end, so if you want to just continue, we'll keep trying.
Rappel au règlement, Monsieur le Président.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. This concerns me for the interpreters because we've had cases where the connection was not good and it had a significant impact on the interpreters. So I find that the sound quality is not good enough for Ms. Michaud to speak. You may consult the interpreters to see if they have good quality sound that does not endanger them. We've had lots of accidents, if you may recall. So that is what concerns me, the health of the interpreters. Could there be a...
Ms. Michaud, just hang on one moment, please. Everyone just hang on. We're going to suspend for 2 minutes and check with the interpreters, which the clerk is doing now.
Hi everybody. Anyone new to the channel, please like and subscribe. Don't forget to share the content with your friends on social media. And I hope you're enjoying the committee. Well, hopefully this is only a moment more and we'll get back to the committee.
I signed the document that allowed us to have a discussion on the transfer of Mr. Luka Magnotta, and that was the only reason not to come back to the Bernardo case. We already had lots of meetings about that. I totally agree with what Mr. Julian said. I don't see this study as a continuation of what we've already done. What I am saying in this case is that we are starting all over again, reassuring the population. A lot has been said about this transfer, which took place in 2022. It's not yesterday that it took place. It's been a few years now since Magnotta was transferred from a maximum security prison to a medium security prison. What I see here is maybe a process that should be apolitical. Correctional Services Canada has a transparent process for such transfers. We had the official saying earlier this week that the correctional services in Canada is fundamentally based on the rehabilitation of offenders, even if they may stay detained for the rest of their life. And that's a legislative mandate, and that they regularly reassess the conditions. They ensure the security and safety of the public. They also look at the rights of the victims. And in compliance with its policy, Correctional Services has to review the security qualifications of an offender every 2 years to see whether they should stay in a maximum or medium security facility. So we do understand that there's a protocol already in place, and this is what CSC came to explain to us during the Bernardo case. So I believe it's important to listen to CSE tell us that once again. We also need to listen to the head of the Makaza facility, who can come and tell us how things work in his facility. Is it true that people can enjoy a certain degree of spectacular comfort that is better than what most Canadians enjoy? They could skate, they could engage in other sports. So what are the conditions? I think we need to hear that from the representative of the Makaza facility. I do not see the need to have 6 meetings on this and to invite multiple witnesses to come and talk about this specific topic. What concerns me in Magnotta's transfer is that he had requested transfers several times in the past and had been denied. The reason why the last transfer took place was because Mr. Magnotta claimed to be trans, and there's a medical team from McGill University and psychologists who assessed him and did not agree and were skeptical with regards to his declarations. But what allowed for this transfer to a medium security facility, and if there's anything we need to question, is this element when it comes to his transfer. Otherwise, we can't start as MPs to interfere in all processes that involve the transfer of offenders in Canada. That's not our role. Maybe it's an opportunity for us to listen to Correctional Services Canada to come tell us what the protocols are, what are the rights or policies they have to respect before they carry out transfers. How do they assess offenders? So maybe it's a good opportunity for us to do that. Now, I will be proposing changes to the motion that was tabled. First of all, I will reread it to tell you where I'll be adding text. In light of the transfer of Luka Magnotta from a maximum security prison to a medium security prison, I will be removing what follows afterwards, and I would say the committee would call for, well, we'll remove 6 meetings. I would say we organized 1 meeting. I would delete the fact that it starts this meeting, but I would say we look into the way the transfer took place, how people are transferred from maximum security facilities, and the committee will report to the House of Commons and call witnesses. So we maintain the Commissioner of Correctional Services Canada, and Kelly, it's important for us to hear her. We remove B, we delete C, and we delete D. We remove E, we remove F, we keep G. The warden of La Makaza institution, we maintain that. We could keep H, representatives from the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers. We remove the I. We also remove what was just added through Ms. O'Connell's amendment, and we add representative of McGill medical team that looked into Mr. Magnotta's case. I don't know if my colleagues will agree with me. I do hope that's the case, but this is not an opportunity for us to engage in politics. I think that some political parties are trying to do that, and that's dishonest. Where I think we have an opportunity to better understand the process, reassure the public when it comes to the process, is to find out if there's a loophole in the psychological or psychiatric assessment that was done on Mr. Magnotta. What justifies his transfer? Could we question the medical team? We could obtain answers from Correctional Services Canada on the transfer process. That's all. We can't start questioning all transfers of offenders in Canada. As I said before, that's not our role as parliamentarians. It's an apolitical role. It's dishonest for us to be partisan on this topic. As I said, I have deleted the 6 meetings. I think 1 meeting is sufficient, in my opinion. It should not be a priority over other studies. We are now working on C26 that we need to conclude before we get to that other meeting. Same thing for auto theft. It's a priority when you compare that to this study. Let's recall that Mr. Magnotta was transferred in 2022. if Mr. Caputo did not go visit the Makaza facility, he will not be here today. I went to visit the Paul Cartier facility 2 years ago, and no scandal came from my visit after I saw people there. So let me repeat, this should be an apolitical process. I hope that my colleagues agree with me that we review the motion and focus on the substance, which is the transfer of Luka Magnotta. Thank you.
Ms. Shaw?
Point of order. I'm not clear that Madame Michaud is moving that motion. Is that sub-amendment being moved?
Ouais, moi, c'est des amendements que je...
I am proposing amendments. I don't know if the clerk wrote that down, or should I send it in writing?
Chair, I heard her move the motion. So yes, if we could just suspend to get the exact wording, I'd appreciate that.
Madame Michaud, j'ai pris en note vos amendements.
Ms. Michaud, I would like to confirm the amendments that I took down. So what I wrote down was after medium security, we remove everything until we get to the point where the committee starts a study where we talk about 6 meetings. We take that out and we talk about 1 meeting only. And we also remove everything that comes after that, saying that the meeting starts this week. So it's going to be 1 meeting to look into how the transfer took place. And we keep the rest totally until we talk about witnesses, and we remove B, C, D, E, F, I, and everything else that was proposed as an amendment by Ms. O'Connell. And you also added a medical team. Yes, that's exactly it.
I have to do that in English, and I can distribute it afterwards to the members.
So, Ms. Michaud, you agree with that? Yeah. Okay.
Can we suspend for like 5 minutes just so the clerk can put that in writing?
Certainly.
Thank
We'll
you.
suspend for 5 minutes.
Well, here we are, suspended again. Well, anyone new, please like and subscribe to the channel. You can also help support the channel by purchasing a super chat or sticker. Those go to help maintain the equipment I use to continue streaming these over YouTube. Yes, absolutely, Jonathan. Or you can become a member of the channel, because that greatly does help support the channel.
security prison to a medium security prison. Now, this part is removed afterwards up to the committee. Immediately is removed, undertake a study of one meeting, and afterwards it's removed on up to on how the decision to make this transfer was made, the prisoner transfer process for prisoners in maximum security facilities, and the committee report its finding to the House of Commons, and the committee called the following witnesses to appear. The Commissioner of Correctional Service Canada, Anne Kelly, afterwards B, C, D, E, F, or strike. G, the warden of La Macasa Institution, and afterwards it's stricken, it's removed from H to also the amendments adopted before to, and sorry, there's a mistake here in English, but the representative from the McGill Medical Team. En français, que à la lumière du transfert du tueur,
that in light of the transfer of Luka Magnotta from maximum security prison to medium security prison, and the committee undertake a study of one meeting. 6 meetings is deleted. The meeting should take place on how the decision to make this transfer was made, the prison transfer process for prisoners. The committee report its findings to the House of Commons, and the committee called the following witnesses to appear: the Commissioner of Correctional Services, and Kelly, and then B to F removed, G is maintained, H, I. Point of order.
I'm voting against the amendment, but there is a difference between the English and French versions. I believe the French version is the right one in this one. In this case, des représentants du syndic des agents correctionnels du Canada.
Representatives from the Union of Canadian Correctional Officers were on the list of witnesses to appear.
Mr. Julian, are you saying H is stricken in French and it should be stricken in English?
No,
or
I'm
opposite,
saying
sorry.
H is not stricken in French and shouldn't be stricken in English.
Yeah,
but Madame Michaud can clarify, but that's what I'd heard.
Exactement, en anglais et en...
Exactly, in French and in English. It should not be stricken. The union should appear.
Make the correction. Thank you.
Et donc, gardons H est gardé.
So H is maintained. From I to O, deleted. O being the amendment adopted, and then we add the McGill Medical Team.
Is everybody in? Agree? Good. All right. We're going to move on to speaking order. Glenn Motz, please. Mr. Motz? Yes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I won't speak at this time.
Sorry, Chair. Point of order.
Just one moment. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to ask, do you want to start a new speaking list?
Yeah, that's the point. Whenever there's an amendment, we have to start a new speaking list.
Okay. Ms. Ferrari? Mr. Julian, your hand's up, I take it, to speak? Mr. Motz? Okay, Ms. Ferrari, do you want to start, please?
On
I didn't get translation. Pardon me?
You want to start?
go ahead.
Point of order. I'm wondering if reluctance to speak means that we'd rather vote on the amendment and then carry on with the main motion.
I believe Mr. McKinnon people want to speak to the amendment. Mr. Paul Haas, and switching with Ms. Ferrari, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very surprised with the amendment from my colleague from the Bloc Québécois. First of all, she's saying that we are playing politics with this, whereas she's supposed to be representing citizens, and then we have such news that is shocking people. It's our job to bring this here and to understand. I do not understand why Ms. Michaud is bringing this down to an administrative process. We just have to organize a 2-hour meeting to understand the process, and then we move on to something else. I think we should maintain what was provided for before. From my understanding, the Liberals had wanted to go even further. So I think we are unanimous around the table that we want to understand why dumpsters like Magnotta were transferred. It's not simply an administrative process, it's more than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hollis. Mr. Shefke, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just want to start off by saying that if any violence, the kind of violence that we saw committed by Bernardo and Magnotta, were ever to occur, God forbid, to any person in my life, any of my loved ones, I would want that person to never see the light of day. And I'll take off my political hat here and my political affiliation and say this for every single member of this committee. If anything happened, any violent crimes committed, God forbid, to any members of your families, I would want that person to be locked up and never see the light of day. And so I'm actually supportive of the motion that was put forward, and I'm supportive of the amendments put forward by ma collègue, Madame Michaud. And I think that the amendments that were put forward will actually allow us to focus our efforts on finding better outcomes for victims in this country. And I think that's important. Based on what I've heard so far this morning, is that there is an intent, and I hope it's not the case, to turn this into political theater. Ms. Ferreri had very vehemently and explicitly said we need to be a voice for those that don't have a voice, the voiceless. Mr. Paul Huss was vehement and forcefully held in his hand Bill of Rights, the victims' rights in this country. Mr. Caputo spent a significant amount of time on Twitter talking about whether or not criminals in this country have access to this activity, hockey rinks, for example, right? And my fear is that that's what's going to happen with this study that is far too important to become political theater. And I hope that truly doesn't happen. Because if it did, I would unfortunately have to state to my conservative colleagues that I will gladly take a chainsaw to their proverbial soapbox and point out, firstly, that transfers from maximum to medium security prisons in this country peaked under Stephen Harper, conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper, 291 in 2012, 2013, and 319 in 2013, 2014, years in which I will point out.
Point of order.
Just in terms of relevancy, I'm pretty sure we're talking about the current Liberal NDP government decisions and not former governments that are no longer here.
Thank you. Continue, Mr. Shefke, please.
I am speaking on the amendment, and I understand that they're going to try and use point of orders to cut off my train of thought because the facts are hurtful. But the next is with regards to the hockey rink that Mr. Caputo tweeted about, that my understanding was actually built decades ago, and the Conservative government had a decade in power, 4 years of which a majority government where they could do whatever they wanted and refused to stand on a soapbox. So where was the outrage there, Mr. Chair?
Point of order.
If we're going to talk about soapboxes, perhaps we could refrain from
Mr.
this.
Chair.
And
Let's debate, Mr. Chair.
Paul Bernardo was not in medium security at the time that Prime Minister Harper was in. Okay. Let's talk about soapboxes. If we're going to talk about
debate,
soapboxes,
guys. Okay.
We can do that.
Is I will gladly point out, and once again, take a chainsaw to the soapbox made of toothpicks and say that the 3 worst years of prison escapes under this Conservative government, under this Conservative opposition happened during the Harper years, Mr. Chair. So, what I'm hoping is that we actually focus on finding solutions for victims and not trying to paint another government as soft on crime when the government that has the worst record on crime is sitting right in front of me, and it's the Conservatives. Now, what I also want to say is that I hope that whatever we do moving forward in this study builds upon what we already know. What we already know, based on the testimony that we received from Commissioner Ann Kelly, a question posed by my colleague Mr. Biddle, was verbatim, would it be a legal order for the minister to interject in the specific transfer of an individual? And her response was, verbatim, my understanding is that the minister does not have that role. It is very much an operational decision. So I hope we build on that because we've established that. We have that testimony on record. I hope we also build on the questioning that I posed to Commissioner Kelly, which was, is the security surrounding a maximum security prison and a medium security prison, is one more secure than the other? And her response was no. And I actually went out, Mr. Chair, and visited several prisons to confirm this on my own, to witness it on my own. So that's been confirmed. So what I hope we do with the motion proposed by the Conservatives and the amendments which I support by ma collègue, Madame Michaud, is that we build on what we've learned, that we actually look for solutions to better outcomes for victims in this country, and that we do not let this become political theater that it looks like the Conservatives would like it to be. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Julian, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm voting against the amendment. I want to start by saying that I think the idea of having an expanded witness list and continuing the study that we started last November makes sense. I don't believe the amendment achieves that. And the amendment actually restricts the kinds of questions that I think we all need to ask about victims and how they are notified, about correctional officers and how their feedback is provided around transfers. And the list that we had adopted of additional witnesses that Ms. O'Connell presented, I thought made a lot of sense. I'm also very concerned about how high escapes were, threatening public safety under the Harper government, and the fact that Conservatives proposed in December slashing dramatically the correctional services budget by nearly $300 million. I don't think any of that comes out with this amendment. But I do want to stress, Mr. Chair, I believe it's important that we respond to victims. In the case of this special emergency meeting, which costs tens of thousands of dollars to put on, if members of two different parties sign a letter, they should at least agree on their approach on how this emergency meeting will be held. We could have had this discussion next Monday at our regular meeting. Instead, we're spending tens of thousands of dollars having this special meeting, and it now appears that the two parties that signed the convocation for this special meeting had two dramatically different visions of how this emergency meeting would proceed. And I think it's incumbent on members of Parliament of all parties to at least agree when they're spending taxpayers' money, as this meeting definitely does, at least agree on what the approach is. So I'll be voting against the amendment, but I would urge all members not to filibuster this out if Conservatives are not in agreement with this amendment, like me. Instead of talking it out so there's no vote, they should at least allow the vote to be held. I think members have to have the opportunity to express their support or their rejection of the amendment and at the main motion. And the only way to do that is to come to a conclusion. We've only got half an hour left in this meeting, and I would hope that that no one would filibuster this out, that we would have the vote on the amendment and proceed from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. Ms. Ferrari, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of points about the amendment. I can't support this amendment, obviously, because number one, I'm not sure why we would remove Paul Bernardo from the motion. As we've heard, we have these letters submitted to the committee, March 9th, 2024. I'm writing today to request and encourage you to undertake a study of the reclassification and transfer of Luka Magnotta and other federal offenders at the emergency meeting called on Monday, March 11th, 2024. I, along with Tennille Chwalslik and Laura Murray, are willing to be witnesses and are available Wednesday through Friday, as well as whenever needed in the future. So I think the other point I think is which is very, very bizarre, I think, for people watching at home, is why the Liberals are bringing up what happened, 10, 15 years ago. What we're talking about is right now. What we're talking about is the most sadistic killer in Canadian history. So I think it just doesn't make any sense. And how, again, back to the point of this motion and the amendment that was put forward by the Bloc, they want to push it down to one meeting. How in the world are you going to solve how and why this happened when we know the minister's office was notified 7 times? So one meeting is certainly not enough. To Mr. Julian's point about wasting taxpayer dollars and public safety, under this coalition that he has with the Liberals, sexual assaults are up 72%. Domestic violence is an epidemic in this country. So if you want to talk about public safety, we can certainly do that. It's never been worse. People have never felt more unsafe under this Trudeau government. In terms of taxpayer dollars, we can also delve into that greatly if he would like, in terms of what he's done with the Liberal government, in terms of we're servicing more debt than we are to health transfers because of their overspending and wasteful spending and corruption. And also we have a clerk and staff that work here regardless of whether we're here or not.
Mr. Julian?
Point of order. None of this is relevant, and I believe this is a filibuster. I do think it's important that we get to a vote in the next half hour prior to the committee meeting ending.
Mr. Julian, Ms. Ferrari, please.
And thank you to Mr. Julian for supporting this motion of not supporting Ms. Michaud's amendment. I do thank him for that, because what this amendment is doing is absolutely gutting the whole point of victims' rights. And I can't stress that enough when we have this opportunity here, and to call it political theater for the victims watching at home. This isn't theater, this is their life. To my Liberal member across the way, this is not political theater, it's their life.
Then stop treating it like political theater, Ms. Ferrari.
Oh,
thank you.
Are you for real? You literally just said if this was your family that you would do this.
Excuse me.
Through you, Mr. Chair.
Please, the interpreters, let's respect them. So go ahead, Ms. Ferrari.
I just think it's bizarre to call. We are literally translating what victims want. That we are literally reading verbatim what they have asked us to do. That is what we were elected to do. I'm not sure how you can call that political theater. It makes no sense. And you can smirk through you, Mr. Chair. He's smirking. If he can explain to me how that is political theater, I would love to hear that. In the meantime, I turn it back over that we must.
Mr. Chair, can I respond to the question just posed by Ms. Ferrari? No. She asked me to respond, so I can respond if she'd like to.
Very quickly, Mr. Shefke, please.
Point of order.
So let's go to 291 transfers in 2012, 2013. Many of whom were murderers and rapists. Where was your outrage then? Where was Stephen Harper's outrage then? Where was your conservative outrage when the 2 years with the largest numbers of transfers occurred? Where was your outrage? That's my facts, Ms. Ferrari.
Hold on, please. Yes. Point of order, Mr. Caputo. Please keep it on topic.
There is a speaking list. My colleague, Ms. Ferrari, was speaking. It is utter hypocrisy for the Liberal member across the way to say that we shouldn't engage in political theater when he cuts off my colleague who is speaking and then demands to respond. He will have due time to respond to the victims and other Canadians. Thank you.
I was given the floor, Mr. Caputo, by the chair.
Okay, that's it. Ms. Ferrari, can you continue, please?
Listen, I'm not even going to credit that with a response because it's whack-a-mole. I mean, I was in grade 8 or whatever grade I was, and it doesn't even make any sense what he's asking me in terms of my position. But what I can tell you right now is my position is I remember being 15 years old when Paul Bernardo was a Scarborough rapist. And every woman my age at 45 years old knows this. And to the point that I brought up already, the judge who sentenced him said he will never be rehabilitated. He was transferred in the dead of night. And to Ms. Michaud's point about this happened in 2022, why are we talking about it now? Because nobody knew. That is gross incompetence on this government's point. That should be even more concerning to anyone else. How did this happen and why? That is the point of this motion. If you want to stop this from happening again, you have to study it and you have to bring forward these people, and in particular, the victims. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're going to move on to Mr. Motz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will speak to the amendment and would like to be my spot on the regular motion to be there after the vote, please. I do not and cannot support the amendment by my bloc colleague. As has already been indicated, victims are depending on this. We have a situation that has developed over the last 8 years through legislation and a soft on crime approach that this is a more common practice. And I think it deserves significant study to be able to understand how and why and how to prevent it moving forward. Now, Ms. O'Connell, in her opening comments, made a statement. Mr. Julian made some statements, and Mr. Schiffke has recently made some statements in reference to this amendment as well by Julian and Schiffke, that there's a the conservative government of the past had the highest record of transfers from maximum to medium or any transfers, period. I would challenge them to show us the actual numbers of how many of those were transferred, were regular offenders and not the worst of the worst. That's what you have to figure out here. We're talking about the worst of the worst. There are maximum security prisoners who can be transferred from maximum to minimum to medium that are not in the same category as dangerous offender designation. These are dangerous offender designated by the courts. So we have to keep that in mind. The other interesting comment was that the escapes. We've had the highest number of escapes under the Harper government in the past. I would challenge Mr. Schiffke to have a look at that, and Mr. Julian. How many of those escapes were from minimum security prisons? And I would venture for you to come back with those numbers, because you'll find them shockingly high. The highest number are from minimum security prisons than from maximum or medium. So again, to try and throw the conservatives of the past under the bus misses the point here. Chair, again, like I said, we have an obligation.
Point of order.
We have an obligation to victims.
Point of order, Mr. Motz. Thank you. Mr. Julian.
Thank you. I always enjoy hearing Mr. Motz, but this is not relevant to the amendment, and I am concerned about a filibuster developing when we really should be proceeding to the vote. Hopefully the amendment will be rejected and we'll move to the main motion, but I don't think a filibuster is appropriate. I think we need to move to an actual vote.
Mr. Julian, Mr. Motz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Julian. I'm only responding to those of you who, like yourself, Mr. Julian, who actually made this comment in response to Ms. Michaud's amendment. So as a result of that, yes, I'm going to speak to it. Now, I agree. This amendment, we need to get to a vote and defeat it. I agree with my Liberal colleagues on adding some more witnesses and giving this the attention that it deserves. And I'm actually surprised that Mr. Schiffke would think otherwise. And I'll have other comments to make when we get back to the motion, the main motion, with respect to some facts on C83 and the like. So thank you for your time, Chair. And again, I cannot and will not support this block amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Caputo, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's ironic that the Liberals initially said they wanted to add witnesses, and now they're in support of rejecting the very witnesses they wanted to add. Howard Saper, John Howard Society, Canadian Aboriginal Legal Services, Black Legal Services, Canadian Civil Liberties Association. These are the very groups the Liberals said we should add, and now we have Mr. Schiffke saying, no, we don't want to add them. We want to go from 6 meetings to 1 meeting. Mr. Chair, That is utter hypocrisy. Mr. Biddle, to his credit, spoke with great sincerity, I would say, when he talked about the impact on the communities. And now he will be asked to vote on this, to go from 6 meetings to 1. Ms. O'Connell echoed similar sentiments. Now she will be asked for this to go from 6 meetings to 1 and gutting the very witnesses that she said should be put forward. And I'm going to wait till Mr. Schiffke gets back to his seat so he can hear this. Please.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm
Through you,
sitting
Mr.
right
Chair.
here.
No, I'm-
If Mr. Caputo needs glasses, I can provide him with
Oh,
some. But I'm
come
sitting
on.
right here.
Oh, come
I'm
on.
literally sitting right in front of you, Mr. Caputo.
That's enough, guys.
Your remarks
okay?
are uncalled for.
Mr. Caputo, are you going to continue?
Yes,
with
I am.
the
And through you,
amendment,
Mr.
please?
Chair, I would really like Mr. Schiffke to hear this. This is from one of the friends of the victims. So when he reduces it from 6 people to 1, including the gutting of the victims in subpoint I, quote, and I received this message a few minutes ago, I think
Point of
it's
order,
important.
Mr. Chair.
Oh, you don't want to hear that one?
Go ahead. Ms. O'Connell,
Mr.
please.
Chair, I think if Mr. Caputo wants to read something into the record, that's fine, but he is attributing a motion to Mr. Schiffke that didn't happen, so I think he should stick to his counterpoints instead of this pretty lame attack on personal attacks. We've all been able to speak our points, and he should continue to do so without the personal attacks, because he's kind of making a fool of himself in this moment.
Thank you. Mr. Caputo, please.
Yeah, I'll always, if standing up for victims means making a fool of myself, Ms. O'Connell, through you, Mr. Chair, I'll make a fool of myself each and every day, and I will show up to Parliament right here, right now, today, tomorrow, and the next day, and make a fool of myself, Ms. O'Connell. Now, I'm going to read this into the record for the benefit of those who plan on voting against this motion, or with this motion to gut from 6 meetings to 1. The Bloc and the Liberals seemingly teaming up to gut the very motion that the Liberals were putting forward. Quote, I think it's important to hear the witnesses on the impact of these moves. Victims deserve more than 1 meeting. End quote. So what I'd really like, what I'd love is for the Liberals and the Bloc to explain on this sub-amendment why they are voting against, why they are voting to gut the very witnesses they said we need to hear from, why they are choosing to side with less information instead of more, while they are accusing others of getting on a soapbox when they themselves are making this political. Mr. Chair, I would love for them to answer that question. Why? Why the victims, please, they should be answering. Thank you.
Mr. Lloyd, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't expecting to get on the speakers list so quickly. I'm just curious, is this, when Mr. Schiffke said he was in support of the Bloc motion to move this from 6 meetings to 1 meeting, was that maybe Mr. Schiffke's personal initiative, or is this the position of the Liberal Party on this committee that they would knowingly vote to reduce this from 6 meetings to 1 meeting, full on knowing that they're removing the Elizabeth Fry Society? Like, it would be impossible for us to hear from, the Black Legal Society, the Aboriginal Legal Society, the Elizabeth Fry Society, the John Howard Society. It just seems to me so bizarre that the Liberals could come forward with such an amendment, which was supported by, 3 parties here at this committee, 3 out of 4 parties, and yet flip-flop and turn 180 degrees so quickly from 6 meetings to 1 meeting and cutting the amount of witnesses. I just find it absolutely bizarre, and I'm curious to know whenever they're up on the speaking list if this is just the initiative of one Liberal member of the committee, or if this is now the position of the entire Liberal Party at the committee that they want to essentially gut this motion, including their own amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. Mr. Couric, please.
Thanks, Chair. And I think that it's time to get to a vote. I will not be supporting this amendment as it silences victims, guts meetings where the Canadians are demanding answers about this. And to silence victims, to reduce the ability for parliamentarians, us around this table, to be able to get answers certainly is tragic at best, and at worst would be unparliamentary. So I will end my comments there, and I would urge all members to vote against the amendment, and then we can vote in favor of this study to start the process of getting answers for Canadians, for victims, so that we can start to bring at least an iota of trust back to a justice system that certainly doesn't seem like it has a whole lot of justice right now. Let's get to a vote.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Couric. We have no one else on the speaking order, so I will call for a vote on the amendment to the motion as amended. Okay. Recorded vote? We'll ask for a recorded vote. Okay.
Ms. O'Connell.
Yes.
Mr. Biddle.
Yes.
Mr. Shifke.
Oui.
Mr. Gay. Mr. Gay.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. McKinnon.
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd.
No.
Mr. Motz.
No.
Mr. Couric.
No.
Mr. Caputo.
No.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
Contre. No. Opposé.
6 to 5. Amendment's approved. Now we'll go back to the original speaking order. And, is that right?
Yes.
Mr. Motz, please. You're up.
Thank you very much, Chair. I can't express my disappointment sufficiently virtually or even in person to comprehend the impact, the repercussions of this vote on this amendment. I will say that we have heard that the government should never interfere in the matters of corrections. They can't. However, Section 6, Sub 1 of the Corrections and Conditional Release Act does give the minister the power to issue directives to the Correctional Services Commissioner. Sections 96D and 96D, or said 6, also allow the governor and council to make open-ended regulations on inmate classification and prison assignments. Now, we have heard in the last study on Bernardo, and we've heard anecdotally today, the Liberals dispute their ability to issue directives or make regulations for individual inmates. The Minister of Public Safety can and regularly does issue directives dealing with larger classes of inmates. For example, in 2022, Minister Mendocino issued new directives on the use of dry cells to keep inmates from bringing contraband into federal prisons. In 2018, then Minister Goodale issued a directive restricting what kind of inmates could be sent to Indigenous healing lodges. Now, we know that nothing would prevent the minister from issuing a directive or cabinet from adopting an order in council mandating that all dangerous offenders, designated dangerous offenders, the worst, as was said before, like Bernardo or Magnotta and others who are designated as such, serve their life sentences with the type of crimes they've committed and keep them in maximum security prisons. Now, I think one of the things that people have been asking me, well, how is it possible that this sort of thing keeps happening? How do inmates get moved, and why are they being moved at the worst of the worst being moved at the rate they're being moved at now, especially those who have these high-profile, type offenders. Now, in 2019, the Liberals introduced Bill C-83 actually was voted on and passed in 2019, and it created a standard in Section 28 of the Act requiring prison selection to be made by the commissioner based on the least restrictive environment for that person. And this repealed previous conservative legislation from 2012 on Safe Streets and Communities Act. Now, we'll hear, and we heard in the last study, it was suggested that, well, conservatives supported Bill C-83. Well, yes, we supported Bill C-83 at second reading to go to committee for amendments. We did not support it at third reading. Now, I think it's unfortunate that we have now gone from the potential of 6 additional meetings to 1 meeting. We'll never get this resolved in 1 meeting. And again, we're going to leave victims on hanging out to dry, so to speak, to continue on with the trauma that they face every time a transfer occurs that has the victim impact like these dangerous offenders do. And as legislators, as members of this committee, I feel strongly that it behooves us to serve our constituents well, and I don't believe, again, that this amendment will do that. Unfortunately, the original motion and the First Amendment brought on by my colleague Ms. O'Connell did serve that purpose, but that has been changed. And again, I'm at a loss as to know how victims will be served in this way, and we can't get to the bottom of what we're doing.
Point of order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead. Point of order, Mr. Julian. Go ahead.
I was just going to raise the point that we only have a few minutes left, and despite the fact that I regret that the amendment passed, I do believe we have to vote on the main motion.
Are we in agreement with that? Yeah. So you want to continue with the speakers list? Yeah. Okay, Mr. Julian, we're going to continue with the speakers list.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The normal hour of adjournment is in 2 minutes. And for those of us in the riding, we do have other events and other commitments. I don't give consent to continuing this meeting beyond the normal adjournment date time.
Thank you, Mr. Julian. So, Mr. Mott, you completed your time, so we'll move to Ms. O'Connell, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to note that, as it's been said already, we support continuing of this study, which is exactly why we move
Point of
forward.
order, Mr. Chair. Point of
order, Ms. Ferrari.
Just on the record that we have extra resources to go longer.
Do we have extra resources? We do have extra resources. Yep. Ms. O'Connell, please. You want to continue?
Thank you, Chair. So as I was saying, we have been supportive of this study. We participated in its, well, this would be a continuation, but on the initial study that was brought forward, we put forward witnesses and we engaged in that. I think the comments have been made in terms of our work and whether or not that what we heard and the testimony we heard, that we want to move forward with also recommendations and continuing that based on some of the information we heard. Unfortunately, and it was very clear with some of the outbursts by our conservative colleagues, that they're not actually interested in justice or safety, because they're outraged about, well, who cares what happened when the Conservatives were in power? is pretty interesting because I think if they are going to sell a narrative to the public that they are tough on crime and only conservatives will deliver on policies that will support victims, I think we as a committee have every right to look at their very record. Because when we look at their record, what you will see is more instances of reclassification from maximum to medium. Now, they can try to explain away all that they want, but that's the reality. They cut services to correctional services facilities. In fact, Mr. Caputo is standing up and wants to suggest that he's standing up for victims over a skating rink, which actually he had quite the media spanking over the weekend in terms of his misinformation that he has been putting out. And that's really harmful and traumatizing for victims and their families to read a political agenda that just simply isn't true. What is true is that very skating rink that he's outraged about was actually in operation under the Conservatives. So when Mr. Schiffke pointed out about the fact that the political theater, what the political theater is the fact that they are willing, Conservatives are willing to say anything, even if it's not true, for the outrage and upset it might cause. And what they don't want to talk about, which is why they interjected so much, is the fact that there was no outrage for a skating rink at this facility when they were in power. A skating rink that was actually operational when they were in power. They don't want Canadians to see the hypocrisy of which they're living under. And so while we tried to start with this committee off the top to have a very reasonable and rational conversation about how do we move forward in terms of continuing this study, which is something we're supportive to do, and to give Canadians that opportunity to hear about the process. Mr. Motts just read into the record saying the minister does have the ability to change these classifications, yet he read in, if you hear his words, he actually read in that the minister has authority to change directives around groups of populations and not reclassifications. His own words don't match or make sense to what Conservatives are arguing. This is why we're supportive. Let's bring back the Correctional Services Canada, who at committee before testified that the minister cannot step in, just as Stephen Harper did not step in and change the over 300 reclassifications from maximum to medium. So, Mr. Chair, I think we're happy to have that conversation again because Conservatives, they don't want to be confused by the truth. And we're happy to continue to put that information on the record because they would rather say things that are deeply emotional and deeply personal, especially for victims, but they're not letting those victims know about their very record while they purport to say that they would do things differently, when in fact we know they wouldn't, and they're willing to say anything. They're willing to say anything for power, and I think that's deeply, deeply sad given the topic. So, Mr. Chair, I think that given we seem to be in a filibuster with Conservatives now, just reading into the record nothing, I'm going to move a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Unbelievable.
Point of order, Mr. Lloyd.
Okay, well, we'd like to get to a vote on this motion, not the motion to adjourn, but the motion at hand. But I understand there is a motion to adjourn. We'll be supportive of it.
Mr. Chair, I'm willing to withdraw that motion if Conservatives have no more speakers on the list and we can vote on the main motion.
Guaranteed.
Okay. We're going to move to a vote on the motion.
Then I withdraw my adjournment vote if we're voting on the main motion. But if there are speakers on the list, then my adjournment would stand.
There's no speakers.
Thank you, Chair.
No.
Ms. O'Connell.
Just clarifying on the main motion.
Yes, the main
As
motion.
amended?
Yes, main motion as amended.
Thank you. Yes.
Monsieur Chiffquier.
Oui.
Mr. Biddle.
Yes.
Mr. Gair.
Yes.
Mr. McKinnon.
Yes.
Mr. Lloyd.
No.
Mr. Kirk.
No.
Mr. Mutz.
No.
Mr. Caputo.
No.
Madame Michaud.
En faveur.
Mr. Julian.
No, contre, opposé.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
6 yeas and 5 nays, so it's carried. Okay.
Chair,
Motion to adjourn. Yes.
I'm moving a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Adjourned.
All right, everybody, that's it. Please like and subscribe, and we will see you next week unless there's a meeting. Anyway, I'll let you know. Have a good day.